Welcome, weary traveler, to this quiet corner of the night, where stories unfold like soft blankets and history becomes a gentle lullaby. Perhaps you've arrived here with tired eyes and a restless mind, seeking that elusive embrace of sleep that seems to dance just beyond your reach. If so, you're not alone in this struggle, not by centuries, not by millennia. Tonight, we're going to journey together into a time when sleeplessness was as common as the gas lamps that flickered in Victorian windows, casting dancing shadows on wallpapered walls. Dim your lights now if you haven't already. Let the glow of your screen soften, creating just enough illumination to guide you into this tale without jarring your eyes back to wakefulness. Settle deeper into your pillows, adjust your blankets until they rest just right across your shoulders, and allow your breathing to slow naturally as we prepare to step back through the mists of time to an era when the very act of falling asleep had become a curious science unto itself. The Victorian age, that long stretch of years from 1837 to 1901 when Queen Victoria sat upon the British throne, was a time of remarkable contradictions. It was an era of unprecedented progress and innovation, yet also one of profound anxiety and restlessness. While steam engines thundered across newly laid railway tracks and telegraph wires carried messages faster than ever before, the people of this bustling age found themselves increasingly unable to quiet their minds when darkness fell. Picture, if you will, the bedroom of a typical Victorian household as evening descends. Heavy curtains of deep burgundy or forest green hang at tall windows, their fabric thick enough to block the intrusive glow of street lamps that had begun to illuminate city neighborhoods with their steady, artificial light. A pattern of roses or geometric designs seems to pulse gently in the wavering candlelight, creating an almost hypnotic rhythm that should, by all rights, encourage drowsiness. Yet our Victorian sleeper lies awake, staring at the ornate plaster. Ceiling with its decorative moldings that catch and hold shadows in their carved depths. The grandfather clock in the hallway marks each passing hour with a resonant chime that seems to grow louder in the silence. Each bong a reminder that sleep remains elusive. The house creaks softly around them, the settling of wooden beams, the whisper of wind through window frames, the distant sound of a night watchman's footsteps on cobblestone streets. This sleeplessness wasn't simply a matter of individual constitution or temporary worry. The very fabric of Victorian society seemed designed to produce restless nights and anxious minds. The rapid pace of industrialization had transformed not just the landscape, but the rhythm of daily life itself. Where previous generations had lived by the natural cycles of sun and moon, rising with dawn and settling with dusk, Victorians found themselves increasingly out of sync with these ancient patterns. Gaslighting, that marvel of modern convenience, extended the useful hours of the day well into what had once been the domain of darkness and rest. Factories could operate around the clock, their machinery never sleeping, their smokestacks painting the sky with perpetual twilight even at midday. The very air in industrial cities carried a constant hum of activity, the clatter of machinery, the rumble of coal wagons, the endless percussion of construction as cities expanded upward, outward at an unprecedented pace. But it wasn't just the external environment that kept Victorians awake. The age had also given birth to a new kind of internal restlessness, a condition that doctors of the time began to diagnose with increasing frequency and growing concern. They called it neurasthenia, a weakness of the nerves, and attributed it to the overwhelming demands of modern life. The telegraph brought news from distant corners of the empire instantaneously, flooding minds with information about wars, disasters, and political upheavals that previous generations might never have learned about at all. The very concept of time had been revolutionized. Railway schedules demanded punctuality to the minute. Factory shifts began and ended with the precision of clockwork. Social obligations multiplied as urban populations grew and society became more complex. The leisurely pace of rural life, where tasks were completed when they were completed and rest came naturally with exhaustion, has been replaced by the relentless tick of mechanical time that waited for no one. In their bedrooms at night, Victorians found their minds churning. With the day's concerns and tomorrow's obligations, They worried about business ventures in an increasingly competitive marketplace, about social standing in a society where appearances mattered more than ever, about the moral implications of the rapid changes transforming their world. The wealthy fretted about investments and the management of their households, while the working classes struggled with the physical and emotional toll of long hours in factories and the constant uncertainty of industrial employment. Even their diet conspired against peaceful sleep. The Victorian dinner table groaned under the weight of heavy multi-course meals eaten late in the evening. Rich sauces, red meat, sweet puddings, and strong coffee created a perfect storm of digestive disturbance that could keep even the most exhausted person tossing and turning for hours. The fashionable practice of taking stimulating drinks, tea, coffee, even coca-based tonics throughout the day meant that many Victorians were essentially consuming what we now recognize as significant amounts of caffeine well into the evening hours. And so, as our Victorian insomniac lies in their comfortable bed surrounded by all the material comforts that progress could provide, they find themselves envying the simple shepherds of ancient times who supposedly counted their flocks. To achieve the peaceful sleep that seems so mysteriously beyond reach, they've tried the traditional remedies passed down through generations: chamomile tea, warm milk, even the time-honored practice of counting sheep butts somehow. In this age of marvels and miracles, these simple solutions seem inadequate to address the complex nature of modern sleeplessness. This inadequacy would lead Victorian ingenuity down some truly remarkable paths. In their determination to solve the problem of insomnia, they would devise cures and contraptions, remedies, and rituals that were indeed stranger than simply counting sheep. Some were harmless, if ineffective. Others were dangerous in ways their practitioners never imagined. And still others were so bizarre that they seem almost comical from our modern perspective. But before we explore these curious attempts to capture sleep, let us first understand the world that created such desperate need for them. Let us walk through the gaslit streets of Victorian London, breathe the coal-tinged air, listen to the constant symphony of urban noise, feel for ourselves the nervous energy that kept an entire generation staring wide-eyed into the darkness. Searching for the peace that seemed to have vanished, along with the quiet simplicities of an earlier age, the stage is set. The players are in place, and our Victorian bedroom awaits. The candle flames flicker lower, the shadows grow deeper, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell tolls the late hour. Our journey into the strange world of Victorian sleep cures is about to begin, and who knows, perhaps in following their quest for rest, we too might find ourselves gently drifting toward the very sleep that so persistently eluded our restless ancestors. As the last light of day fades from the London sky, a different kind of illumination begins to flicker to life. Throughout the sprawling metropolis, one by one, the gas lamps emerge from the gathering dusk like earthbound stars, their steady flames casting pools of amber light along cobblestone streets that never truly sleep. This is Victorian London in the evening hours, when the city transforms from the bustling marketplace of day into something altogether more mysterious and restless, a place where the very innovations meant to improve life have conspired to banish the natural rhythms that once guided human rest. Walk with me now down these lamplit thoroughfares. Feel how different this evening light is from the gentle fade of sunset that once marked the end of the working day. Gas flames burn with mechanical consistency, neither warming nor cooling, neither brightening nor dimming, with the natural cadence that had governed human activity for millennia. Instead, they maintain their unwavering glow, turning night into a kind of artificial twilight that confuses the ancient instincts. Buried deep in our bodies, those primordial signals that should be telling us, even now, to prepare for rest. The streets themselves pulse with activity that would have been unthinkable in earlier ages. Horse-drawn carriages clatter past at all hours, their iron-shod wheels striking sparks from the stone streets, their drivers calling out warnings to pedestrians who hurry along sidewalks made slippery by the constant London drizzle. The sound echoes off the tall buildings that line these narrow streets, creating a percussion that reverberates through the night air and penetrates even the thickest walls. Finding its way into bedrooms where exhausted Londoners lie, hoping for the silence that never quite arrives. As we stand here on this gaslit Victorian street, listening to the distant rumble of late-night traffic and breathing the cold air that never quite clears, we begin to understand why the simple remedy of counting sheep seemed inadequate. To address the complex web of stimulation that characterized urban life in the 19th century, the Victorians found themselves trapped between their appreciation for the conveniences and opportunities of modern life and their desperate need for the kind of deep, restorative sleep that seemed increasingly elusive in their bright, noisy, stimulating world. Tomorrow, we'll explore how this realization led them to revisit and ultimately reject the traditional sleep remedies that had served previous generations, setting the stage for the remarkable and often bizarre innovations they would devise in their quest to recapture the peaceful nights that progress had somehow stolen from them. In the flickering candlelight of a Victorian bedroom, the distant sounds of the restless city filter through heavy curtains. Our sleepless protagonist turns to the most ancient and trusted of all sleep remedies. Close your eyes for a moment and picture this time-honored ritual. 1 sheep, 2 sheep, 3 sheep, each woolly figure leaping gracefully over a low fence in the meadow of imagination. Their gentle faces serene, their movements hypnotically repetitive. It's a practice so old that its origins are lost in the mists of human history, yet so enduring that even today, in our age of sophisticated sleep science, the phrase counting sheep remains synonymous with the pursuit of slumber. The beauty of this ancient technique lies in its elegant simplicity. Here is a meditation that requires no special equipment, no expensive preparations, no learned instructions from physicians or apothecaries, just the mind's eye, a pastoral scene, and the gentle rhythm of numerical progression. One by one, the sheep appear in the imagination. Perhaps they're the fat, contented use of the English countryside, their wool thick and cream-colored, their bells tinkling softly as they bound over a wooden gate worn smooth by countless previous. Let us but as our Victorian insomniac lies there in the darkness, dutifully visualizing sheep number 47, then 48, then 49. A troubling realization begins to creep in around the edges of consciousness. The sheep are not working their ancient magic. If anything, the counting seems to be having the opposite effect, each number making the mind more alert, more active, more determined to reach some arbitrary milestone like 100 or 500 or perhaps even 1,000 sheep before. Admitting defeat, this failure of the traditional remedy represents something profound about the Victorian condition. These were people who had grown up hearing stories of their grandparents' generation, when life moved at the pace of horse and cart, when evening brought a natural exhaustion that made sleep as inevitable as sunrise. Those earlier times, the mind was not constantly bombarded with the kind of stimulation that characterized industrial life. A farmer who had worked from dawn to dusk with his hands and back found that his thoughts naturally quieted as darkness fell. The counting of sheep, if it was needed at all, was merely a gentle nudge toward a sleep that was already approaching on its own. But the Victorian mind was a different creature entirely. Fed on a steady diet of newspapers and novels, stimulated by the rapid pace of urban life, accustomed to the constant input of sensation and information that characterized the modern world, it was not easily lulled by simple, repetitive imagery. Instead of finding the counting of sheep soothing, many Victorians discovered that the practice actually engaged their minds more fully, leading them to elaborate upon the basic visualization in ways that became increasingly complex and stimulating. Rather than restful, some found themselves creating detailed backstories for each sheep. This one was a way named Bessie, who had twin lambs last spring. That one was a ram with a particularly dignified bearing who reminded them of their stern Uncle Reginald. Others began to worry about the logistics of the imaginary scene. How high was the fence? Really? And was it safe for sheep to be jumping over it? And what lay on the other side that made the crossing necessary? The simple, mindless repetition that should have quieted thought instead became a launching point for the kind of active imagination that was the enemy of sleep. The Victorian era had inherited a rich tradition of folk remedies for sleeplessness, accumulated over centuries of human experience with the common problem of restless nights. Many of these remedies reflected the close connection between pre-industrial life and the natural world. Medieval healers had recommended sleeping with fresh herbs under the pillow lavender for its soothing scent. rosemary for its supposed ability to ward off nightmares, mint to clear the head of troubling thoughts. These practices acknowledge something that Victorian medicine was only beginning to understand, that the senses continued to work even during sleep, and that the right combination of gentle stimuli could encourage the transition from wakefulness to rest. Other traditional remedies focused on the physical preparation for sleep. The practice of washing the feet in cool water before bed, for instance, is believed to draw blood away from the head and toward the extremities, creating a sense of overall relaxation. This folk wisdom actually contained a grain of physiological truth. The cooling of the feet does trigger vasodilation that can promote sleep. But the Victorian tendency toward hot baths and heavily heated bedrooms often worked against this natural process. The ancient Greeks had recommended the practice of progressive muscle relaxation, deliberately tensing and then releasing each part of the body in sequence until complete physical rest was achieved. Medieval monks had developed elaborate breathing exercises designed to quiet both body and spirit in preparation for rest. Various cultures had created specific prayers or mantras to be repeated during the transition to sleep. Recognizing that the mind needed something to occupy it during the vulnerable period, when conscious control was gradually relinquished, but as the Victorians experimented with these traditional approaches, they found that many simply didn't translate well to their modern circumstances. The urban Thurplow remedies seemed quaint and ineffective in bedrooms, already filled with the chemical odors of gaslighting and urban air. The breathing exercises that had worked for contemplative monks in quiet monasteries were difficult to maintain in houses where the sounds of the city intruded even into the most private spaces. Even the timing of these traditional remedies seemed out of step with Victorian life. Previous generations had retired to bed shortly after sunset, when their bodies' natural circadian rhythms were already preparing for sleep. The elaborate social schedule of Victorian evening entertainment meant that many people were not even beginning their bedtime preparations until hours after dark, at a time when their ancestors would have been deep in slumber. The Victorian approach to counting sheep began to evolve in response to these challenges. Some sleep seekers abandoned the pastoral imagery entirely, substituting more modern and supposedly more engaging visualizations. They might count railway cars on an imaginary train, each one carrying different cargo and painted in different colors. Others counted the gas lamps along a familiar street, visualizing the warm glow of each fixture in the pool of light cast on the pavement below. These modifications revealed both the ingenuity and the fundamental misunderstanding that characterized Victorian approaches to sleep. The practitioners correctly identified that their minds needed something different from the simple repetition that had worked for their ancestors. But they failed to realize that making the visualization more complex and detailed was likely to be counterproductive. Instead of quieting mental activity, these elaborate counting schemes often had the effect of engaging the imagination more fully, leading to the kind of active mental involvement that actually opposed the goals of sleep preparation. Some Victorian sleep experts began to recommend what they called mathematical meditation, the practice of performing simple arithmetic problems in one's head, as a way of occupying the conscious mind while allowing the unconscious processes of sleep to take over. This might involve adding sequential numbers, or subtracting backwards from 1,000, or calculating the areas of imaginary geometric shapes. The theory was sound, engaging the analytical parts of the brain, while avoiding emotional or creative thinking. But in practice, many people found that mathematical problems kept them more alert rather than less. The failure of these traditional and modified counting techniques led to increasing frustration among Victorian insomniacs. Here were remedies that had supposedly worked for countless generations, yet they seemed powerless against the particular type of sleeplessness that characterized modern life. This sense of being let down by ancient wisdom created a market for new solutions, more dramatic interventions that promised to address the unique challenges of sleep in an industrial age. Above this street-level symphony, the city breathes out its industrial exhalations in great plumes of smoke and steam. Factory chimneys never rest, their red brick towers piercing the sky like exclamation points, punctuating the horizon with Their constant output of coal smoke that turns the air thick and hazy, even on clear nights. The smoke carries with it not just the soot and ash of burning coal, but the very essence of this new industrial age, the smell of progress, some call it, though others might describe it as the scent of sleeplessness itself, in the wealthier districts of Mayfair and Belgravia. Grand mansions stand behind wrought-iron gates, their windows glowing with the warm light of countless gas fixtures. But even here, in these bastions of comfort and privilege, the night air carries the distant rumble of the city's ceaseless activity. The wealthy Victorian, lying in their four-poster bed beneath heavy curtains, can still hear the faint whistle of trains arriving at nearby stations, the clop of hooves as late-night revelers return from the theater. The occasional shout of a night watchman making his rounds. The gaslighting that fills these grand homes creates its own peculiar atmosphere. Unlike the soft, flickering light of candles or oil lamps that had illuminated evening hours for centuries, gas flames burn with an intensity that seems almost aggressive in its steadiness. The light they cast is harsh and white, lacking the warm amber glow that naturally prepares the eye for darkness. Victorian physicians were beginning to suspect that this artificial illumination might be part of the problem that the human eye and brain evolved over countless generations to respond to the gradual dimming of natural light, simply didn't know how to process this new form of constant, bright illumination. But it's not just the visual assault of gaslighting that disrupts Victorian sleep, it's the subtle but persistent presence of the gas itself. Every fixture, every flame, releases a small but constant stream of combustion products into the air. The gas used for illumination isn't the clean-burning natural gas we know today, but rather town gas, a mixture of hydrogen, methane, and carbon monoxide produced by heating coal in closed retorts. This town gas carries with it a distinctive odor, slightly sweet but with an underlying chemical sharpness that sensitive noses detect, even when the concentration is too low to be dangerous. In poorly ventilated rooms, which describes most Victorian bedrooms with their heavy curtains and sealed windows designed to keep out the cold and damp, the air gradually accumulates these gas products throughout the evening. By the time our Victorian sleeper retires for the night, they're breathing air that contains just enough of these chemicals to create a subtle sense of unease, not enough to cause immediate illness, but quite enough to interfere with the delicate neurochemical processes that govern the transition from wakefulness to sleep. The sounds of the industrial city penetrate even the most carefully constructed domestic sanctuaries. In the working-class neighborhoods that have sprung up around the new factories, the noise is constant and overwhelming. The great mills and foundries operate around the clock, their machinery creating a rhythmic pounding that becomes the heartbeat of the industrial district. Workers arrive and depart in shifts, their wooden clogs echoing on stone streets, their voices calling out greetings or complaints as they pass. Beneath bedroom windows, even in the middle-class suburbs that represent the Victorian ideal of domestic tranquility, the reach of industrial noise is inescapable. Railway lines cut through these neighborhoods like arteries, carrying freight trains laden with coal and manufactured goods at all hours of the day and night. The locomotives announce their presence with steam whistles that can be heard for miles, their wheels creating a rhythmic clicking on the rails that builds and fades but never entirely disappears. The psychological impact of this constant stimulation cannot be overstated. Human beings had evolved to live in environments where evening brought a natural quieting of activity, where the approach of darkness signaled to both body and mind that the time for rest was approaching. The Victorian city offered no such natural cues. Instead, it presented the nervous system with a constant state of mild alertness, sense that something was always happening just beyond the range of immediate perception. Victorian doctors began to document what they termed railway spine and telegraph nerves, conditions they attributed to the constant stimulation of modern life. Patients complained of symptoms that we might now recognize as chronic stress responses, difficulty concentrating, irritability, digestive problems, and above all, the maddening inability to fall asleep despite physical exhaustion. The speed of modern communication meant that news traveled faster than ever before. bringing reports of distant disasters and political upheavals directly into the Victorian living room through newspapers that were printed and distributed multiple times per day. The very architecture of Victorian homes is designed to display prosperity and respectability, inadvertently contributed to the problem. Rooms were often small and crowded with furniture, heavy fabrics, and decorative objects that absorbed and held the various odors and emanations of daily life. The wallpapers, popular for their elaborate patterns and rich colors, were often printed with dyes that contained lead, arsenic, or other chemicals that slowly released toxic vapors into the air. The carpets, thick and luxurious, trapped dust, smoke, and other particles, creating an environment that was visually impressive but potentially harmful to those trying to achieve restful sleep. In the servant quarters of these grand houses, conditions were even more challenging. Maids and footmen slept in tiny attic rooms, directly under roofs that amplified every sound from the street below. The gas fixtures in these areas were minimal, often just a single small flame to serve an entire corridor, leaving these workers to navigate their evening routines in semi-darkness that was somehow more disturbing than complete blackness would have been. The diet of the average Victorian further complicated their quest for peaceful sleep. The evening meal, taken fashionably late to accommodate the extended social day that gaslighting made possible, was typically heavy and elaborate. Multiple courses of rich foods, roasted meats with heavy gravies, puddings loaded with sugar and fat, strong cheeses, and fortified wines created digestive challenges that could keep even the most exhausted person awake for hours. The popular practice of taking a nightcap, a final alcoholic drink before bed, might have seemed like a solution, but often created more problems than it solved. As the alcohol's initial sedating effects wore off and left the drinker more wakeful than before, coffee and tea, imported from the expanding British Empire at increasingly affordable prices, had become central to Victorian social life. Afternoon tea stretched into evening tea, and the caffeine consumed throughout the day accumulated in systems that had no evolutionary preparation for such stimulation. Many Victorians consumed what would be considered massive amounts of caffeine by modern standards, often continuing to drink strong tea or coffee well into the evening hours without any understanding of the connection between their beverage choices and their nighttime restlessness. The social pressures of Victorian life added another layer of mental stimulation that interfered with sleep. The elaborate codes of conduct that governed every social interaction required constant vigilance and created anxiety about potential social mistakes. The evening hours, which should have been a time for relaxation and mental unwinding, were often filled with social obligations, dinner parties, theatrical performances, charity events, and other gatherings that kept the mind engaged and stimulated well past the natural time for rest. Even in the privacy of their bedrooms, Victorians found little escape from the mental agitation of their daily lives. The fashion for elaborate bedroom furnishings meant that these spaces were often crowded with reminders of social status and material concerns. Dressing tables laden with expensive toiletries, wardrobes filled with the complex clothing required for different social occasions, and walls decorated with paintings and photographs that told stories of family history and achievement. All of these well-meaning attempts to create beautiful domestic spaces inadvertently filled the bedroom with visual stimuli that could keep an active mind occupied when it should have been settling into rest. The physical discomforts of Victorian sleeping arrangements added their own obstacles to peaceful rest. Mattresses were typically filled with horsehair or cotton batting that compressed unevenly over time, creating hills and valleys that made comfortable positioning difficult. The elaborate bed curtains that were fashionable in wealthier homes, while providing privacy and some protection from drafts, also trapped stale air and created a sense of confinement that could trigger feelings of claustrophobia in sensitive sleepers. The Victorian fascination with mesmerism and hypnotism led some insomniacs to develop elaborate self-hypnosis rituals, often involving gazing at specific objects while repeating prescribed phrases or following detailed visualization exercises. A crystal paperweight might serve as a focusing point, positioned at the precise distance and angle that personal experimentation had determined to be most effective. The gazing ritual might involve specific patterns of eye movement, prescribed durations of concentration, and detailed mental imagery designed to induce the trance-like state that was believed to precede natural sleep, as we observe these increasingly elaborate bedroom rituals. We begin to understand how the Victorian struggle with insomnia drove otherwise rational people toward behaviors that bordered on obsessive-compulsive disorder. The failure of simple remedies created a vacuum that was filled by increasingly complex personal theories about sleep and its requirements. Each small success a night when sleep came more easily after trying a new arrangement or ritual reinforced the belief that the key to consistent rest lay in perfecting these elaborate preparations. But these rituals, however comforting they might have been to their practitioners, often created new problems even as they attempted to solve old ones. The time and mental energy required for elaborate bedtime preparations could themselves become sources of anxiety and stimulation. The fear of forgetting a crucial step in the ritual or of performing it incorrectly added new layers of worry to minds already struggling with sleepless. Tomorrow we will explore how this quest for perfect sleep conditions led Victorian inventors to devise mechanical solutions, contraptions, and devices that promised to automate the process of achieving rest. But for tonight, we watch our Victorian insomniac complete their elaborate preparations and finally settle into their carefully arranged bed. We can appreciate both the ingenuity and the desperation that drove them to transform the simple act of going to sleep into these complex ceremonies of hope and habit. In the gaslit workshops and inventors' garrets of Victorian Britain, creative minds turned their attention to what they perceived as the great engineering challenge of the age: the mechanical production of sleep. If the Industrial Revolution could harness steam to power great locomotives and machinery to weave fabric faster than any human hand, surely the same principles of innovation and mechanical advantage could be applied to the stubborn problem of human insomnia. What emerged from these workshops were devices so wonderfully bizarre, so charmingly impractical, and yet so earnestly conceived that they represent perhaps the most endearing chapter in humanity's long struggle against sleepless picture, if you will. The bedroom of a progressive Victorian gentleman who has decided to embrace the mechanical solution to his sleep troubles. The room itself has been transformed from a simple place of rest into what resembles a cross between a laboratory and a medieval torture chamber. Filled with contraptions of brass and steel, leather and springs, all designed with the single-minded purpose of forcing the human body into the surrender that is sleep. Dominating the center of the room stands perhaps the most ambitious of all Victorian sleep devices, the rocking bed. This is not the gentle, cradle-like motion that one might imagine, but rather a substantial piece of furniture that resembles a cross between a four-poster bed and a ship's berth. The entire bed frame is mounted on a system of springs and counterweights that allow it to rock back and forth with mechanical precision, the motion controlled by a clockwork mechanism that can be wound like a giant music box and set to operate for predetermined periods. The theory behind the rocking bed was soundly based on observation. After all, humans have known for millennia that rhythmic motion can induce sleep. Babies are rocked to slumber, sailors learn to sleep despite the rolling motion of ships at sea, and even adults often find themselves drowsy during long carriage rides over rough roads. The Victorian inventors reasoned that if gentle, consistent motion could be produced mechanically, it could be used to trick the body into the relaxed state that precedes natural sleep. But the execution of this simple concept resulted in devices that were anything but gentle. The first rocking beds were powered by elaborate clockwork mechanisms that produced motion with the regularity of a metronome, but with little regard for the subtle variations in rhythm that make natural rocking soothing. The sleeper would wind the mechanism, climb into bed, and then endure what amounted to a precisely timed mechanical massage that continued relentlessly, whether it was producing the desired effect or not. The sound alone must have been remarkable. Steady tick and whir of clockwork, the creaking of wooden joints under mechanical stress, the soft whoosh of air as the heavy bed frame moved back and forth through its prescribed arc. Some users reported that the mechanical noises became soothing after a period of adjustment, providing a kind of white noise that masked the urban sounds that might otherwise prevent sleep. Others found the mechanical precision of the motion more stimulating than relaxing, their minds becoming focused on predicting the exact moment when the bed would reach the end of its swing and begin moving in the opposite direction. The more elaborate rocking beds included additional features that their inventors believed would enhance the sleep-inducing effect. Some were equipped with music boxes that played gentle lullabies in synchronization with the rocking motion, creating a multimedia sleep experience that was unprecedented in human history. Others included systems of weights and pulleys that allowed the speed and amplitude of the rocking to be adjusted throughout the night, perhaps beginning with vigorous motion to overcome initial wakefulness and gradually slowing to a gentle sway as sleep approached. One particularly ambitious design included a mechanism that would automatically stop the rocking motion once the sleeper's breathing had achieved the slow, regular pattern associated with deep sleep. This early attempt at biofeedback involved a delicate system of bellows and pressure sensors that monitored the sleeper's chest movements. Connected to the bed's clockwork through an ingenious arrangement of levers and gears, whether this system ever worked as intended is doubtful, but the ambition it represents. The Victorian belief that sleep could be not just encouraged, but monitored and controlled through mechanical means reveals something profound about the era's faith in technological solutions to human problems, adjacent to the rocking bed. We might find another popular Victorian sleep device, the weighted blanket. But this was no simple, heavy covering. Victorian weighted blankets were engineering marvels in their own right. It's filled not with the glass beads or plastic pellets used in modern versions, but with sand that had been carefully processed and prepared according to elaborate specifications. The sand was typically heated to remove all moisture, then sifted through fine screens to ensure uniform grain size, and finally treated with aromatic oils to provide a pleasant fragrance when the blanket was disturbed by movement. The weight distribution in these blankets was calculated with mathematical precision, based on the user's body weight and personal preference, but also incorporating theories about pressure points and their relationship to nervous system function. Some Victorian sleep specialists believed that specific amounts of pressure applied to particular areas of the body could trigger physiological responses that would promote rest. The resulting blankets were often sectioned into compartments, each containing a precisely measured amount of sand positioned to provide optimal pressure to different parts of the sleeper's anatomy. Using a Victorian weighted blanket was itself a ritual that required considerable preparation. The blanket had to be positioned carefully on the bed, its compartments arranged so that the weight would be distributed properly when the sleeper lay down. Some designs included straps or ties that could be used to secure the blanket to the bed frame, preventing it from shifting during the night and creating uneven pressure distribution. The sheer weight of these contraptions, some exceeded 50 pounds, meant that once a sleeper was covered, movement became difficult, if not impossible, creating what amounted to a gentle form of physical restraint. The psychological effect of the weighted blanket was often as important as the physical sensation. The feeling of being held down, of having movement restricted in a controlled and predictable way, seemed to satisfy some deep human need for security and containment. Victorian users often reported that the blanket made them feel safe and protected, as if they were being embraced by some benevolent force that would guard their rest throughout the night. But perhaps the most peculiar of all Victorian sleep devices were the so-called somnambulist chairs, specialized furniture designed for people who preferred to sleep sitting up or who found conventional beds uncomfortable due to breathing problems or other health issues. These chairs were not simple recliners, but elaborate, mechanical constructions that could be adjusted in dozens of different ways to provide optimal support for every part of the body. Victorian medical journals began to publish articles questioning the effectiveness of simple behavioral remedies for what doctors increasingly saw as a medical condition, requiring professional intervention. The counting of sheep was dismissed as a superstition, a quaint folk practice that might have worked in simpler times but was inadequate for addressing the complex neurological effects of modern life. This medicalization of sleep problems would lead to some of the most bizarre and dangerous remedies in the Victorian pharmacological arsenal. But before we explore those chemical solutions, It's worth pausing to consider what was lost when the Victorians abandoned the simple wisdom of counting sheep. The practice, at its best, represented something valuable in acknowledgement that the transition to sleep required a gentle occupying of the conscious mind while the deeper processes of rest took over naturally. With the technique itself, but with the environmental and psychological conditions that made it difficult to apply. A person lying in a quiet, dark room with fresh air and a settled mind might still find that counting sheep works exactly as it was intended to work. But a Victorian insomniac, surrounded by the stimulation of modern life and carrying the accumulated tensions of industrial society, needed something more powerful, more dramatic, more suited to their particular circumstances. This recognition that the old ways were no longer sufficient would drive Victorian inventors, doctors, and entrepreneurs to devise increasingly elaborate and often dangerous alternatives to the simple remedies that had once been enough. As we'll see in the chapters that follow, their quest for modern solutions to the ancient problem of sleeplessness would lead them down some remarkable and often troubling paths, creating a whole industry of sleep aids that were indeed stranger than simply counting sheep. The stage is now set for our exploration of these more dramatic remedies. In the soft glow of the gas lamp, with the sounds of the restless city providing a constant background hum, our Victorian sleeper is about to abandon the gentle world of imaginary sheep in favor of solutions that promise to be more suited to the complex challenges of modern insomnia. Step quietly now into the Victorian medicine cabinet. That fascinating repository of bottles and vials that line the shelves like silent sentinels against the forces of sleeplessness. Here, in this carefully organized collection of remedies and restoratives, we find the evidence of humanity's ancient relationship with the plant kingdom, a relationship that the Victorians pursued with both scientific enthusiasm and dangerous naivety. Each bottle tells a story, each label promises relief, and each carefully measured dose represents hope in liquid form. Hope that tonight, finally, sleep will come as easily as it did in the distant mythical past. The soft lamplight catches the glass surfaces, creating tiny rainbows in the amber and green bottles that contain the Victorian pharmacopoeia of rest. Some of these preparations are as old as human civilization itself, their recipes passed down through generations of herbalists and healers who understood, through centuries of careful observation, which plants could coax the human nervous system toward the blessed state of unconsciousness. Others are newer creations, products of the Victorian Age's confident belief that modern chemistry could improve upon nature's designs, that the application of scientific principles could create more reliable and potent sleep aids than anything the ancients had devised. Let us begin our exploration with the gentlest of these remedies, those that our Victorian sleeper might try first, before desperation drives them toward more dangerous solutions. In a simple ceramic jar labeled in careful script, we find dried chamomile flowers, their papery petals still holding the faint, apple-like scent that has soothed anxious minds for thousands of years. The preparation is straightforward: a handful of the dried flowers steeped in hot water until the liquid takes on a pale golden color and releases its distinctive, comforting aroma. Picture our insomniac sitting at the edge of their bed, cradling a delicate china cup filled with this ancient remedy. The steam rises from the surface, carrying with it not just the herbal fragrance, but also memories of childhood illness. When a mother's gentle hands prepared the same soothing drink, the taste is mild, slightly bitter, but not unpleasantly so, with an underlying sweetness that doesn't require the addition of sugar or honey. As the warm liquid settles in the stomach, there's often a subtle sense of relaxation, a gentle unnodding of the tensions that have accumulated throughout the day. But chamomile, gentle as it is, often proves insufficient against the robust insomnia of the modern age. Our Victorian sleeper, having finished their cup of golden tea and still finding their mind as active as ever, might reach next for valerian root, a remedy with a reputation both more powerful and more troubling than the innocent chamomile. The bottle containing valerian tincture bears warning labels, for this is a plant that demands respect. Even opening the container releases an odor that is unmistakably medicinal earthy, musty, with an underlying note that some describe as resembling dirty socks left too long in a damp place. The taste of valerian is challenging in a way that chamomile never is. Mixed with water or wine, it creates a liquid that seems designed to punish the tongue bitter, acrid, with an aftertaste that lingers long after the dose has been swallowed. Victorian medical guides recommend starting with small amounts, perhaps 20 drops in a glass of water, and increasing the dose gradually until the desired effect is achieved. The physical sensation that follows can be unsettling for the uninitiated, a heaviness that seems to settle over the limbs like a weighted blanket, a gradual dimming of mental acuity that signals the herb's action on the nervous system. Valerian works. There's no doubt about that. Unlike chamomile's gentle suggestion of calm, valerian makes a more forceful intervention in the body's chemistry, binding to the same neural receptors that modern pharmaceutical sleep aids target. But this effectiveness comes with complications that Victorian users were only beginning to understand. Some people experience vivid, disturbing dreams when using valerian. Their sleep filled with imagery that is more intense and memorable than usual. Others find that the herb's effects linger into the following day, creating a grogginess and mental fog that can be as problematic as the original insomnia. For those seeking something stronger still, the Victorian medicine cabinet offers preparations that blur the line between herbal remedy and pharmaceutical drug. Tincture of opium, more commonly known as laudanum, sits in its dark bottle like a sleeping dragon. It's quiet and harmless in appearance, but possessing a power that can both heal and destroy. The liquid itself is unremarkable brown, slightly viscous, with an odor that is sweet and cloying, reminiscent of overripe fruit with an underlying chemical sharpness that hints at its potent nature. Laudanum represents both the height of Victorian pharmaceutical sophistication and the depth of their misunderstanding about the nature of addiction and dependency. Derived from the opium poppy through a process that concentrates the plant's psychoactive alkaloids into a stable liquid form. Laudanum was prescribed for everything from headaches to heartbreak, from physical pain to emotional distress. In the context of sleep disorders, it was considered a miracle cure, a few drops in water or wine. And even the most stubborn insomnia would surrender to the drug's inexorable pull toward unconsciousness. The experience of taking laudanum is unlike that of any herbal remedy. Within minutes of swallowing the bitter liquid, a warm sensation begins to spread through the body, starting in the stomach and radiating outward until it reaches the very fingertips. Anxiety melts away as if it had never existed. Physical discomfort fades to irrelevance, and the mind enters a state of dreamy detachment, where the concerns of daily life seem as distant and unimportant as events from someone else's childhood. But this pharmaceutical paradise comes at a price that many Victorian users discovered too late. Laudanum is profoundly addictive, creating a physical dependence that can begin after only a few nights of use. The body quickly develops tolerance, requiring larger and larger doses to achieve the same effect.
Ow.
While the withdrawal symptoms that follow discontinued use can be worse than the original insomnia, Victorian literature is filled with cautionary tales of respectable citizens who began using laudanum for legitimate medical reasons, only to find themselves enslaved by a drug that promised rest but delivered only a deeper form of torment. The middle ground between gentle herbs and dangerous opiates is occupied by a fascinating array of preparations that reflect Victorian ingenuity and the era's complex relationship with both tradition and innovation. Warm milk with nutmeg, for instance, represents the domestication of exotic spices for medical purposes. The nutmeg itself, transported from distant islands at considerable expense, contains compounds that can produce mild sedative effects, but only when consumed in quantities that approach toxicity. A pinch stirred into warm milk creates a comforting bedtime drink. A larger amount can cause hallucinations, nausea, and other unpleasant side effects. The preparation of this simple remedy becomes its own soothing ritual. The milk must be heated slowly, stirred frequently to prevent scorching, and brought just to the point where steam begins to rise from the surface. The nutmeg is grated fresh, never the pre-ground powder that sits too long in containers, releasing its sharp, resinous fragrance into the warm kitchen air. The final mixture has a pale beige color and a taste that is both familiar and exotic. The creamy comfort of milk enhanced by the complex, slightly bitter notes of the spice. Victorian pharmacists also created elaborate compound preparations that combined multiple sleep-promoting ingredients in carefully calculated proportions. Dr. Morrison's Universal Medicine, popular in the 1840s and 1850s, contained not only opium and alcohol, but also camphor, mercury, and various herbal extracts in a formula that its creator claimed could cure virtually any ailment. Mother Bailey's quieting syrup promised to soothe restless babies and adults alike with a mixture that included morphine, alcohol, and chloroform, a combination that modern medicine recognizes as potentially lethal, but which Victorian parents administered with confidence based on the manufacturer's assurances of safety. The alcohol component of many Victorian sleep remedies deserves particular attention, as it represents another area where traditional wisdom collided with modern misunderstanding. The nightcap, a final alcoholic drink taken before bed, was considered not just socially acceptable, but medically advisable. Brandy, port wine, whiskey, or gin might be prescribed by physicians as sleep aids, their warming effects and initial sedative properties making them seem like natural solutions to the problem of restless nights. A glass of port wine, its deep red color, catching the gaslight as it sits on the bedside table, certainly creates an immediate sense of relaxation. The alcohol quickly enters the bloodstream, producing a mild euphoria and drowsiness that can make falling asleep easier. The ritual of sipping the wine slowly, savoring its complex flavors, the sweetness balanced by tannins, the fruit notes enhanced by the fortification process provides a transition between the activities of the day and the passivity of sleep. But alcohol, like laudanum, is a treacherous ally in the quest for rest. While it may help someone fall asleep more quickly, it disrupts the natural architecture of sleep, preventing the deep, restorative stages that are essential for physical and mental health. Victorian users often found that their alcohol-assisted sleep was filled with vivid dreams and frequent awakenings, leaving them more tired in the morning than they had been the night before. The temptation to increase the dose just one more glass to ensure a full night's rest led many Victorians down the path toward alcoholism, a condition that their society was poorly equipped to understand or treat. The patent medicine industry that flourished in the Victorian era created an endless array of proprietary sleep aids, each claiming to be more effective than its competitors. Godfrey's cordial promised to quiet restless children with a mixture that included opium, treacle, and spices. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup contained morphine and alcohol in proportions that varied depending on the batch and the regulatory oversight. In the region where it was manufactured, Dr. McMunn's elixir of opium was marketed directly to adults suffering from insomnia, with advertising that emphasized the product's pharmaceutical sophistication, while downplaying its potential for creating dependency. These commercial preparations represented the Victorian faith in progress and scientific advancement. The belief that modern manufacturing techniques could create more reliable and effective remedies than the traditional preparations made by local herbalists. The bottles were elegantly designed, the labels printed with elaborate typography that suggested both medical authority and commercial success. The contents were standardized or claimed to be ensuring that each dose would provide the same therapeutic effect. But standardization in the Victorian pharmaceutical industry was more aspiration than reality. Manufacturing processes were poorly understood, quality control was minimal, and the concentration of active ingredients could vary wildly from batch to batch. A preparation that provided gentle relief one week might prove dangerously potent the next, while a new bottle of the same product might contain so little active ingredient as to be completely ineffective. The Victorian medicine cabinet also contained remedies that targeted the environmental factors that contributed to sleeplessness. Smelling salts, designed to clear the sinuses and provide a sharp, cleansing sensation, were used not only to revive fainting ladies, but also to clear the head before sleep. The theory was that congested nasal passages and stale air in the lungs prevented the deep, regular breathing necessary for rest. A few deep inhalations of the pungent ammonia-based salts would shock the respiratory system into alertness, followed theoretically by a rebound effect that would promote deeper relaxation. Menthol. Preparations derived from peppermint plants served a similar purpose. A few drops of peppermint oil on a handkerchief, held near the nose while reclining, created a cooling sensation that opened the airways and provided a refreshing contrast to the stuffy atmosphere of most Victorian bedrooms. The scent was clean and sharp, cutting through the accumulated odors of gaslighting, heavy fabrics, and inadequate ventilation that characterized urban domestic spaces as we survey this collection of bottles and preparations, each representing a different approach to the ancient problem of sleeplessness. We begin to understand both the sophistication and the limitations of Victorian pharmaceutical knowledge. These remedies reflect genuine observation and experimentation, accumulated wisdom about the effects of various plants and chemicals on human physiology. But they also revealed the dangerous gaps in understanding that characterized pre-modern medicine: the failure to recognize addiction potential, the inability to standardize dosages, the tendency to assume that natural substances were inherently safe. Tomorrow we will leave this pharmaceutical treasury and explore the behavioral remedies that Victorians devised when chemical solutions proved insufficient or too dangerous. But for now, as the gaslight burns low and the bottles catch the last gleams of illumination, we can almost feel the presence of all those hopeful insomniacs who reached for these preparations in their desperate quest for the sleep that seemed to grow more elusive with each passing year of industrial progress. As we cross the threshold from the medicine cabinet into the private sanctuary of the Victorian bedroom, we enter a realm where desperation has given birth to ritual, where the simple act of preparing for sleep has evolved into elaborate ceremonies that would have seemed bizarre to earlier generations. Here, in the intimate space where hope and exhaustion meet each night, we discover that when conventional remedies fail, the human imagination proves remarkably creative in devising new approaches to the ancient challenge of courting slumber. Victorian bedroom at bedtime has become a theater of careful preparations, each action performed with the solemnity of religious observance. Our insomniac has learned, through countless nights of experimentation, that the slightest deviation from their established routine might mean the difference between sleep and another endless night of staring at the ceiling. Watch now as they begin their nightly ritual, each gesture deliberate and meaningful. Small ceremony, another hedge against the wakefulness that has become their greatest enemy. The preparation begins with the curtains-heavy drapes of burgundy, velvet or dark green brocade that must be arranged with mathematical precision. Not simply drawn closed, mind you, but positioned so that not the smallest sliver of gaslight from the street below can penetrate the rooms carefully constructed. Darkness. Our sleeper moves along the window, checking and rechecking the overlap where the curtain panels meet, ensuring that the fabric hangs straight and true. It's creating a barrier against the outside world that is both physical and psychological. This obsession with perfect darkness reflects a growing Victorian understanding of light's role in sleep disturbance, though their methods of achieving it often became ritualized far beyond practical necessity. Some insomniacs developed elaborate systems of secondary curtains lighter, fabric panels hung behind the heavy drapes to catch any errant beam that might escape the primary barrier. Others constructed frames designed to hold thick blankets over the windows, creating what amounted to temporary walls that could transform even the brightest room into a cave-like sanctuary. The ritual extends to every source of illumination within the room itself. Gas fixtures must be turned down with ceremonial care, the flames reduced to the smallest possible point before being extinguished entirely. But even this simple action has been complicated by the development of personal superstitions and elaborate protocols. Some Victorian sleepers insisted that the lamps must be dimmed gradually, never suddenly, to avoid the shock of abrupt darkness. Others developed specific sequences: bedroom lamps first, then hallway fixtures, Finally, the reading lamp by the bed, each extinguished only after a prescribed interval had elapsed. The consultation itself follows a ritual that has evolved over decades of medical practice. Dr. Whitmore produces a stethoscope, still a relatively new instrument that never fails to impress patients with its scientific sophistication. Listens carefully to his patient's heart and lungs, nodding sagely at sounds that presumably reveal important information about the internal workings of the body. He examines the tongue, checking for signs of digestive disturbance that might contribute to sleeplessness, and feels the pulse with the careful attention of a musician tuning an instrument. But the most important part of the examination is the detailed questioning about daily habits and lifestyle choices. Dr. Whitmore inquires about diet, what foods are consumed, and at what hours. How much tea and coffee pass the lips each day, whether the evening meal is taken too late or consists of dishes too rich and stimulating for proper digestion. He asks about exercise, whether the patient takes sufficient fresh air and physical activity to tire the body naturally, or conversely, whether excessive exertion might be overstimulating the nervous system and preventing proper rest. The work environment receives particular attention, for Dr. Whitmore, like many of his colleagues, has developed theories about the relationship between occupation and sleep disorders. Those who engage in excessive mental labor, clerks who spend long hours hunched over ledgers, students who tax their brains with intensive study, businessmen who worry constantly about financial matters, are considered particularly susceptible to the kind of nervous exhaustion that manifests as insomnia. The doctor's questions probe not just what work is done, but how it is done, in what posture, under what lighting conditions, with what degree of mental strain and emotional stress. The social environment also comes under scrutiny. Victorian medicine has begun to recognize the connection between emotional disturbance and physical symptoms, though the understanding remains primitive by modern standards. Dr. Whitmore inquires delicately about family relationships, worries, and social obligations that might be creating the kind of mental agitation that interferes with rest. He is particularly interested in what he terms moral causes, guilt, anxiety, or spiritual distress that might be manifesting as physical symptoms. Based on this thorough examination and questioning, Dr. Whitmore begins to formulate his treatment recommendations, each suggestion delivered with the confident authority that his patients have learned to expect from medical professionals. The cornerstone of his approach is what Victorian medicine calls hygienic treatment, a comprehensive reformation of the patient's daily habits designed to restore the natural balance that modern life has disrupted. First and foremost, the doctor declares, removing his spectacles to clean them with deliberate care, we must address the fundamental disorder in your daily routine. The human body is designed to follow certain natural rhythms, what the ancients called the circadian cycle, and our modern habits have done much to disrupt these ancient patterns. You must begin by establishing regular hours for sleep and waking, regardless of how you feel in the moment. Retire each night at precisely 10 o'clock and rise each morning at 6, whether you have slept well or poorly. And the body will gradually learn to anticipate these times and prepare itself accordingly. The dietary recommendations that follow are elaborate and specific, reflecting Victorian medicine's growing understanding of the relationship between nutrition and health. Though filtered through theories that modern science would find questionable, red meat should be avoided in the evening hours, being too stimulating for the nervous system of a person already prone to excitability. Fish, properly prepared, is considered more suitable for the evening meal, being lighter and more easily digested. Vegetables should be cooked until quite soft, fruits being considered too taxing for sensitive digestive systems. The consumption of stimulating beverages receives particular attention. Tea and coffee must be strictly regulated, with no caffeinated drinks consumed after 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The doctor recommends specific herbal alternatives: chamomile tea in the evening, perhaps a small glass of warm milk with a pinch of nutmeg before bed. Alcohol, surprisingly, is not forbidden, but rather regulated: a small glass of port or sherry with dinner is considered beneficial for the nerves. But anything stronger or consumed in larger quantities is deemed counterproductive. Exercise prescriptions are equally detailed and specific. Dr. Whitmore recommends morning walks in the fresh air, not vigorous hikes that might overstimulate the system, but gentle, contemplative strolls that will provide mild physical activity without excessive exertion. The walking should be done in natural settings, whenever possible parks rather than city streets, country lanes rather than urban thoroughfares, as the doctor believes that exposure to nature has inherent therapeutic properties that can calm the overexcited nervous system. But the most ambitious of Dr. Whitmore's recommendations involves what Victorian medicine calls the rest cure, a radical intervention that requires temporary withdrawal from the stresses and stimulations of normal life. For wealthy patients who can afford such treatment, the doctor recommends a stay at one of the specialized sanitariums that have begun to appear in the countryside. Institutions designed specifically for the treatment of nervous disorders through carefully controlled environmental conditions. These rest cure establishments represent the pinnacle of Victorian medical thinking about sleep disorders. Located in rural settings, far from the noise and pollution of industrial cities, they offer patients the opportunity to live according to carefully regulated schedules and environments. It's designed to promote healing and restoration. The daily routine at such institutions is structured with almost military precision set times for meals, exercise, treatment, and rest. Designed to retrain the nervous system to function according to natural rather than artificial rhythms. The treatments available at rest cure facilities often border on the elaborate. Hydrotherapy, the use of carefully controlled water treatments, is considered particularly beneficial for nervous conditions. Patients might spend hours each day in warm baths, infused with mineral salts or herbal preparations. The water temperature regulated to promote relaxation without causing excessive languor. Cold water treatments, brief showers or plunges, are used to invigorate the system and improve circulation, always followed by warm wrapping and periods of rest. Massage therapy, still considered somewhat experimental in Victorian medical practice, is another component of the rest cure approach. Trained attendants use systematic rubbing and manipulation of the muscles to promote relaxation and improve what doctors call nervous tone. The massage is performed according to specific protocols, with particular attention paid to the spine and neck, areas that Victorian medicine considers crucial for proper nervous system function. For patients who cannot afford the luxury of institutional treatment, Dr. Whitmore provides detailed instructions for creating rest cure conditions at home. The bedroom must be completely reorganized, heavy curtains to exclude all light, comfortable but not luxurious furnishings to avoid overstimulation, and careful attention to ventilation and temperature control. The patient should spend increasing amounts of time in this carefully controlled environment, gradually withdrawing from the activities and responsibilities that have contributed to their nervous exhaustion. The social aspects of the rest cure are considered as important as the physical interventions. Patients are encouraged to limit their social interactions, avoiding the kind of exciting or emotionally demanding conversations that might overstimulate the nervous system. Reading is restricted to gentle, uplifting material, religious texts, pastoral poetry, or improving literature that will elevate the spirits without creating excessive mental activity. Newspapers and business correspondence are strictly forbidden. As the doctor believes that engagement with worldly affairs prevents the mental rest that is essential for recovery, Dr. Whitmore also prescribes what he calls mental discipline, specific exercises designed to train the mind to achieve the kind of calm focus that promotes natural sleep. These might include simple meditation practices, borrowed from various religious traditions but adapted for medical purposes. The patient is instructed to spend periods each day in quiet contemplation, focusing attention on peaceful imagery or repetitive prayers that will gradually teach the mind to release its grip on the worries and excitements that prevent rest. The doctor's faith in these treatments is absolute, backed by what he considers to be both scientific understanding and extensive clinical experience. He speaks with conviction about cases he has successfully treated. Nervous businessmen restored to peaceful sleep through dietary reform, Anxious ladies cured of chronic insomnia through carefully prescribed rest treatments. Young people rescued from the overstimulation of modern education through systematic withdrawal and gradual reintroduction to normal activities. Candles, when used, presented their own ritualistic challenges. The flame must be snuffed. Never blown out, the latter method being considered conducive to nightmares by those who had experienced disturbing dreams after careless candle extinguishing. The wick must be trimmed to precisely the right length before lighting, and the candle holder positioned at exactly the correct distance from the bed to provide just enough illumination for the final preparations without creating the kind of dancing shadows that might keep an active mind occupied with imagined shapes and movements. But light is only the beginning of the elaborate preparations that Victorian insomniacs devised in their quest for perfect sleep conditions. Temperature control became another area of obsessive attention, with rituals that often contradicted the conventional wisdom of the time. While most Victorians heated their bedrooms to tropical levels, a practice that modern sleep science recognizes as counterproductive, some insomniacs discovered through personal experimentation that cooler temperatures promoted better rest. These rebels against conventional comfort developed elaborate systems for achieving the perfect sleeping temperature. Windows might be opened in precise increments, measured not in casual estimates but in actual inches, perhaps 3 inches at the top sash, 1 inch at the bottom, adjusted throughout the evening as outdoor temperatures changed. Some installed multiple thermometers around the room, checking temperatures as obsessively as modern diabetics monitor blood sugar, making minute adjustments to heating and ventilation. Systems in pursuit of an optimal sleeping environment. The bed itself became the focus of increasingly elaborate preparation rituals. The positioning of pillows evolved from simple, comfort-seeking into complex, geometric arrangements that were believed to influence the quality of rest. Some Victorian sleepers developed systems involving 4, 5, or even 6 pillows of different sizes and firmness, each positioned according to carefully worked-out principles of support and alignment. The head pillow must be fluffed exactly so many times, never more, never fewer, and positioned at a precise angle relative to the mattress edge. Body pillows, though not yet commercially available, were improvised using additional bedding rolled in shape to provide support for various parts of the anatomy. Side sleepers constructed elaborate barriers of pillows and bolsters designed to keep them in the optimal position throughout the night. Back sleepers experimented with pillow arrangements that would prevent them from rolling onto their sides, where they had convinced themselves sleep was less restful. The bedclothes themselves were subject to increasingly complex preparation rituals. Sheets must be pulled tight with hospital corner precision, their surface smoothed until not the smallest wrinkle remained to create potential discomfort. Blankets were layered according to elaborate systems, perhaps a light cotton sheet next to the skin, followed by a wool blanket for warmth, topped with a heavier coverlet for weight and psychological comfort. Some insomniacs developed personal theories about textile combinations, convinced that certain fabrics worked synergistically to promote rest, while others created subtle irritations that prevented deep sleep. The Victorian fascination with herbal remedies extended beyond the medicine cabinet into the bedroom itself, where aromatic preparations were deployed according to elaborate protocols. Lavender sachets might be positioned not randomly but according to carefully researched principles, perhaps one under the pillow, another in each corner of the room, a fifth hanging from the bedpost at precisely head height. The sachets themselves were often homemade according to family recipes that specified not just the type of lavender, but its harvest date, drying method, and the phase of the moon under which it was gathered. Other aromatic interventions became equally ritualized. Rose petals scattered between the sheets in patterns that were believed to influence dream content. Sprigs of rosemary placed under the mattress to ward off nightmares, positioned according to compass directions that were thought to enhance their protective properties. Mint leaves tucked into pillowcases, but only certain varieties of mint, gathered at specific times of day and dried according to precise protocols. Some Victorian insomniacs developed elaborate relationships with onions, yes onions, as sleep aids. The practice of sleeping with sliced onions under the pillow or in small dishes around the room was based on folk beliefs about the vegetable's ability to absorb impurities from the air and calm the nervous system. The ritual preparation of these aromatic treatments became remarkably complex, with different insomniacs developing preferred varieties of onion, specific methods of slicing and placement, and detailed theories about how long the onion should be exposed to air before use. The tears that inevitably accompanied onion preparation were sometimes considered part of the therapeutic process, a cleansing emotional release that prepared the spirit for rest. Some practitioners developed elaborate protocols for onion meditation, sitting quietly with freshly cut onions while allowing the natural tears to flow, believing that this physical and emotional purging would create optimal conditions for peaceful sleep. Prayer and meditation rituals became increasingly elaborate as Victorian insomniacs sought spiritual solutions to their physical problems. Where previous generations might have offered simple bedtime prayers, the sleep-deprived Victorians developed extended spiritual practices that could occupy an hour or more of preparation time. These might include specific sequences of prayers for different concerns, thanksgiving for the day's blessings, quests for peaceful dreams, appeals for protection from nightmares, and elaborate litanies designed to quiet the mind through repetitive devotion. Some developed personal relationships with patron saints of sleep, creating bedroom shrines with specific candles, images, and offerings designed to invoke divine intervention in their nightly struggle with insomnia. Saint Dymphna, patron saint of nervous disorders, received particular attention from Victorian insomniacs, who might spend considerable time each evening in prayers specifically addressed to her. Intercession. Meditation practices borrowed from various Eastern traditions began to appear in Victorian bedrooms, though often adapted and modified in ways that would have been unrecognizable to their original practitioners. Breathing exercises might be performed according to elaborate counting systems, perhaps inhaling for 7 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 8, repeated in sequences that were believed to induce the proper physiological state for sleep. Progressive. Muscle relaxation techniques became increasingly sophisticated, with some practitioners developing personal systems that involve tensing and releasing muscle groups in specific sequences, holding each tension for prescribed periods and focusing attention on the sensation of relaxation that followed. These exercises might begin with the toes and work systematically upward through the entire body, or start with the scalp and move downward. Depending on personal theories about the optimal direction for releasing physical tension, the positioning of personal objects around the bedroom became another area of elaborate ritual development. Some insomniacs became convinced that certain possessions, family photographs, religious artifacts, favorite books, or personal mementos must be positioned in specific locations and arrangements to create the proper spiritual atmosphere for rest. A photograph of deceased parents might need to face the bed at a particular angle, while a childhood toy required placement on the left side of the room rather than the right. These object positioning rituals often reflected deeper psychological needs and anxieties that the sleepers themselves might not have fully understood. The careful arrangement of familiar possessions created a sense of control and security in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. The ritual itself, the precise placement and adjustment of objects, provided a structured activity that marked the transition from the public world of daily responsibilities to the private realm of rest and dreams. Some Victorian bedrooms began to resemble elaborate still life compositions, every visible object positioned according to aesthetic and spiritual principles that were believed to influence the quality of rest. Books might be stacked in specific heights and arrangements, their titles facing particular directions. Clothing for the following day would be laid out according to precise protocols, never crumpled, always smoothed flat, positioned to avoid creating visual chaos that might disturb the pre-sleep mind. Mirrors presented particular challenges for superstitious sleepers, many of whom became convinced that reflective surfaces in the bedroom could trap souls or attract unwanted spiritual influences during the vulnerable hours of sleep. Elaborate rituals developed around the covering of mirror-specific fabrics that must be used, particular ways of draping them, prescribed prayers or incantations to be spoken while performing the covering.
house.
Some insomniacs installed curtains, or screens that could be drawn around mirrors, while others simply turned all reflective surfaces toward the walls during nighttime hours. But underlying Dr. Whitmore's confident prescriptions is a growing awareness that sleep disorders represent something new and challenging in human experience. The traditional remedies that had worked for previous generations seem inadequate to address the particular stresses and stimulations of industrial society. The doctor's treatments represent attempts to recreate, through medical intervention, the natural conditions that had once made sleep easy and automatic for most people. As the consultation draws to a close, Dr. Whitmore provides his patient with written instructions, detailed schedules for daily activities, specific dietary recommendations, and careful directions for implementing the rest-cure principles at home. He emphasizes that recovery will require patience and persistence, that the nervous system, once disrupted, cannot be quickly restored to proper function. But he also offers hope, the assurance that Victorian medical science, properly applied, can solve even the most stubborn problems of human health and well-being. The patient leaves the consulting room with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Relief at finally having professional guidance and understanding, apprehension at the comprehensive changes that will be required to implement the doctor's recommendations. The morning sun seems brighter as they step onto the London street. The sounds of the city, while still present, somehow seem less overwhelming now that they have been placed within a medical framework that promises eventual resolution. As the evening shadows lengthen across the Victorian bedroom and our weary sleeper finally succumbs to the elusive embrace of slumber, we enter a realm that the Victorians found both fascinating and terrifying: the mysterious landscape of dreams and nightmares that occupied the sleeping mind. Here, in the strange country that lies between wakefulness and death, the rational certainties of the daylight world gave way to a twilight realm where the impossible became commonplace, where the dead walked among the living, and where the deepest fears and desires of the human heart played out in bizarre, theatrical productions that no conscious mind could have conceived. The Victorians lived in an age of scientific discovery and rational inquiry. Yet when it came to understanding the nature of dreams, they found themselves caught between emerging medical theories and ancient superstitions that refused to yield to the light of modern knowledge. Dreams, they believed, were windows into realms that science could not yet explore, glimpses of the future, messages from the dead, or warnings from divine providence that spoke through the mysterious language of symbol and metaphor that characterized the sleeping mind. Picture our Victorian dreamer as sleep finally arrives, their breathing deepening into the slow, regular rhythm that signals the mind's departure from the waking world. But even in this state of rest, the brain continues its mysterious work, weaving together the day's experiences, memories, and anxieties into the strange narratives that we call dreams. The gaslight that burns low in the hallway casts shifting shadows through the bedroom door, and these moving patterns of light and darkness become incorporated into the dream landscape, transforming into phantom figures that dance at the edges of sleeping vision. Victorian dream theory was a mixture of medical observation and folkloric belief. Doctors had begun to notice connections between physical conditions and dream. Content how a heavy meal consumed too close to bedtime could produce vivid and disturbing dreams, how illness often brought nightmares in its wake, how certain medications seemed to intensify the dreaming experience. But alongside these rational observations existed a rich tradition of dream interpretation that treated sleeping visions as meaningful communications from supernatural realms. The influence of diet on dreams was a subject of particular fascination for Victorian physicians and their patients. It was widely believed that certain foods, when consumed in the evening hours, would produce specific types of dreams. Cheese, particularly the strong, aged varieties favored by Victorian palates, was notorious for causing vivid nightmares. The phrase cheese dreams entered the popular vocabulary as a shorthand for the kind of bizarre, frightening visions that might visit someone foolish enough to indulge in a late-night snack of mature cheddar or pungent Stilton beef, especially when consumed in the form of the heavy roasts that graced Victorian dinner tables, was thought to produce dreams of violence and conflict. The sleeper who retired after a substantial meal of rare roast beef might find themselves experiencing dreams of warfare, physical struggle, or aggressive confrontation visions that Victorian dream theorists attributed to the stimulating properties of red meat acting upon the sleeping nervous system. Spicy foods carried their own dream-inducing reputation, with curry, pepper, and exotic seasonings believed to heat the blood and create dreams of adventure, travel, and exotic lands. Given the Victorian fascination with their expanding empire and the mysterious cultures they encountered in distant colonies, such dreams were often welcomed rather than feared, providing armchair travelers with nocturnal adventures in places they might never visit in waking life. But it wasn't just food that was believed to influence the content of dreams. The physical environment of the bedroom itself was thought to play a crucial role in determining whether sleep would bring peaceful rest or disturbing visions. Cold rooms were associated with dreams of death and dying, as the body's natural cooling during sleep was interpreted as a harbinger of the final chill that accompanies the end of life. Warm, stuffy chambers might produce dreams of fire, hell, or tropical climates where the dreamer found themselves struggling against oppressive heat. The position of the bed within the room was considered crucial for ensuring peaceful dreams. Victorian superstition held that beds should never be placed directly in line with the door. This arrangement was believed to create a pathway for malevolent spirits to enter the dreams of the sleeping occupant. Similarly, mirrors in the bedroom were viewed with suspicion, as their reflective surfaces were thought to trap souls or create doorways between the world of the living and the realm of the dead. The phenomenon of nightmares received particular attention from Victorian dream theorists, who developed elaborate explanations for these disturbing nocturnal experiences. The term nightmare itself derives from ancient folklore about the night hag, or mare, a malevolent spirit that was believed to sit upon the chests of sleeping people, creating the sensation of suffocation and paralysis that characterizes what modern medicine recognizes as sleep paralysis. Victorian accounts of nightmare experiences are remarkably consistent in their descriptions of this terrifying phenomenon. Sufferers reported awakening to find themselves unable to move or speak, conscious of a malevolent presence in the room, often accompanied by the sensation of a heavy weight pressing down upon their chest. The experience was so vivid and frightening that many Victorians became convinced they had actually been visited by supernatural entities. Rather than simply experiencing a natural neurological phenomenon, the treatment of nightmares often involved elaborate protective rituals designed to ward off the evil spirits that were believed to be responsible for these disturbing experiences. Iron objects, horseshoes, keys, or pieces of old metal might be placed under the pillow or hung above the bed, as iron was traditionally believed to repel supernatural entities. Salt might be sprinkled around the bed or across windowsills, creating barriers that malevolent spirits supposedly could not cross. Religious protections were equally important in the Victorian arsenal against nightmares. Before sleep, not just as expressions of faith, but as specific incantations designed to invoke divine protection against the forces of darkness. Crosses, religious medallions, or passages of scripture might be placed strategically around the bedroom, creating a sacred space that would be proof against supernatural intrusion. The interpretation of dream content became a popular parlor entertainment. During the Victorian era, with dream dictionaries and interpretation guides becoming best-selling publications, these books promised to reveal the hidden meanings behind common dream symbols, treating the sleeping mind as a kind of natural telegraph system that transmitted important information through coded imagery that required expert interpretation. To decode, dreams of flying were interpreted as signs of spiritual elevation and moral progress, suggesting that the dreamer was rising above earthly concerns and approaching a higher state of consciousness. Dreams of falling, conversely, were seen as warnings of moral decline or impending failure. Cautionary visions that urged the dreamer to examine their conduct and make necessary corrections before disaster struck. Water in dreams carried complex, symbolic meanings that varied depending on its condition and the dreamer's interaction with it. Clear, flowing water was generally considered a positive symbol, representing purification, spiritual renewal, or the approach of good fortune. Muddy or stagnant water, however, was interpreted as a warning of deception moral confusion, or impending illness. Drowning dreams were particularly ominous, suggesting that the dreamer was being overwhelmed by circumstances beyond their control. Animal symbolism in dreams received extensive analysis in Victorian interpretation guides. Horses were generally positive symbols, representing strength, nobility, and progress. Though the color and condition of the dream horse could modify this interpretation. Black horses might warn of impending death or disaster, while white horses promised spiritual guidance and protection. Dogs symbolized loyalty and friendship, but aggressive or rabid dogs in dreams warned of betrayal or conflict with trusted companions. The dead appearing in dreams were treated with special significance, as Victorians believed strongly in the possibility of communication between the living and the deceased. Dreams featuring departed family members or friends were often interpreted as actual visitations, rather than simple products of memory and longing. Such dreams were carefully analyzed for messages or warnings that the deceased might be trying to communicate. And dreamers often altered their behavior based on advice or information received during these nocturnal encounters. Prophetic dreams visions that seemed to predict future events were widely accepted as genuine phenomena in Victorian culture. Newspapers regularly published accounts of dreams that had accurately foretold disasters, deaths, or other significant events, and many people organized their lives around warnings or guidance received through dream visions. The boundary between sleeping and waking knowledge was considered much more porous than modern psychology would suggest, with dreams treated as an alternative source of information about reality rather than simply as products of unconscious mental activity. The Victorian fascination with mesmerism and spiritualism extended into dream theory, with some practitioners claiming that skilled operators could influence or direct the dreams of sleeping subjects. Experiments were conducted in which mesmerists attempted to plant specific dream content in the minds of sleeping volunteers, or to use the dream state as a means of communication across great distances. While these experiments rarely produced the dramatic results their proponents claimed, they reflected the Victorian belief that the sleeping mind existed in a state of heightened receptivity to its influences that the waking consciousness would reject or ignore. As we watch our Victorian dreamer navigate the strange landscape of sleep, moving through visions that blend memory with imagination, fear with desire, we begin to understand how the mysterious nature of dreams added another layer of complexity to the challenge of achieving peaceful rest. For many Victorians, going to sleep meant entering a realm where rational control was suspended and supernatural forces might hold sway, a prospect that could be as frightening as it was fascinating. Adding psychological barriers to sleep that no amount of mechanical ingenuity or medical intervention could overcome, the grandfather clock in the hallway strikes the hour of midnight, its deep bronze voice echoing through the quiet house as our weary Victorian finally surrenders to the gentle pull of approaching slumber. The gas lamps have been turned down to their smallest flames, creating pools of amber light that seem to pulse gently with each small current of air that moves through the carefully prepared bedroom. Outside, the sounds of London have settled into the quieter rhythms of the night. Watch the distant clip-clop of a late hansom cab, the measured footsteps of a constable making his rounds, the soft whistle of wind moving through the narrow spaces between buildings here, in this sanctuary that has been prepared with such meticulous care, such desperate hope. Our insomniac has finally found the peace that has eluded them for so many restless nights. The elaborate rituals have been completed. The strange devices have been wound and positioned, the herbal remedies have been consumed, and the doctor's prescriptions have been faithfully followed. But at last, the accumulated wisdom of Victorian sleep science begins to work its gentle magic, drawing the exhausted mind away from the bright, stimulating world of consciousness toward the soft darkness where rest and restoration wait. Watch now as the breathing deepens and slows each exhalation, releasing a little more of the tension that has held sleep at bay. The carefully positioned pillows cradle the head in precisely the right angle. The weighted blanket provides its reassuring pressure, and the lavender sachets release their ancient promise of peace into the still air of the bedroom. The mechanical, rocking bed moves in its gentle, hypnotic rhythm, while somewhere in the background, The soft ticking of clockwork devices creates a lullaby of precisely measured time that gradually fades from conscious awareness. The mind begins to drift. Thoughts becoming less focused, less insistent in their demands for attention. The worries of the day, business concerns, social obligations, the endless stream of information that characterizes modern Victorian life start to lose their grip on consciousness, fading like distant voices heard across a widening expanse of water. The gas lamp beside the bed burns with steady patience, its flame neither growing nor diminishing, but maintaining that perfect balance between light and shadow that seems to encourage the gradual transition from wakefulness to sleep. The mind begins to drift, thoughts becoming less focused, less insistent in their demands for attention. The worries of the day, business concerns, social obligations, the endless stream of information that characterizes modern Victorian life start to lose their grip on consciousness, fading like distant voices heard across a widening expanse of water. The gas lamp beside the bed burns with steady patience, its flame neither growing nor diminishing, but maintaining that perfect balance between light and shadow that seems to encourage the gradual transition from wakefulness to sleep in this drowsy state between wake and sleep. Our Victorian dreamer begins to experience the strange phenomena that Victorian science is only beginning to understand. Hypnagogic hallucinations, those curious sensory experiences that occur at the boundary between consciousness and dreams, create gentle visions that dance at the edges of perception. Perhaps it's the pattern of wallpaper that seems to shift and move in the lamp's flickering light, or the sound of footsteps in the hallway that might be real or might be the creation of a mind. Already halfway into the realm of dreams, the physical sensations of approaching sleep are welcomed now, rather than fought against. The feeling of sinking deeper into the mattress, as if the bed itself is gently embracing and supporting the tired body, brings comfort rather than anxiety. The gradual relaxation of muscles that have been tense throughout the long day creates a sense of letting go, of finally allowing the body to rest. In the way that nature intended, but modern life has made so difficult to achieve, the breathing continues to slow and deepen. Each breath drawing in the carefully prepared air of the bedroom, perhaps scented with the peppermint oil that was dabbed on the pillowcase, or carrying the faint aroma of the chamomile tea that was consumed as part of the evening's preparations. The heart rate settles into the slower rhythm of rest, no longer driven by the stimulation and anxiety that have characterized the waking hours, but finding instead the peaceful cadence that allows for true restoration. The transition from drowsiness to actual sleep happens gradually, almost imperceptibly, like the way daylight fades into evening, or the way a gentle rain begins with just a few scattered drops before developing into a steady shower. One moment there is still some awareness of the bedroom, the soft sounds from the street outside, the play of light and shadow on the ceiling, and then, so gently that the exact moment cannot be identified, consciousness slips away, and the mind enters the mysterious realm of dreams. The dreams that come are not the violent nightmares that have plagued so many Victorian nights, but gentle visions that seem to flow naturally from the peaceful state that has been so carefully cultivated. Perhaps our dreamer finds themselves walking through a country garden where lavender grows in neat, fragrant rows, and the only sounds are the gentle humming of bees and the distant tinkling of sheep bells. The sun is warm but not oppressive. The air is fresh and clean, and there is no urgency, no anxiety. It's no pressure to be anywhere other than exactly where they are in this moment. Or perhaps the dream takes the form of a quiet library, its shelves lined with books whose pages hold not business accounts or newspaper reports of distant troubles, but poetry and gentle stories that speak of peace and contentment. The lighting in this dream library is perfect, soft, and warm without being harsh, bright enough to read by, but gentle enough to rest in. There is a comfortable chair by a window that looks out onto a scene of pastoral tranquility, and time seems to move slowly and peacefully, without the mechanical precision of city clocks or the urgent demands of industrial schedules. The sleep that has finally arrived is deep and restorative, the kind of rest that allows the body to repair itself and the mind to process and integrate the experiences of the day without the anxiety and overstimulation that have made such processing impossible during waking hours. The elaborate Victorian sleep aged the rocking beds and weighted blankets. The herbal remedies and mechanical devices fade into irrelevance now that their purpose has been achieved. Sleep, once it truly arrives, needs no artificial assistance. To maintain itself, the night passes peacefully, marked by the gentle progression of dreams that flow from one scene to another. Like chapters in a book written by a benevolent author who understands the dreamer's deepest needs for peace and restoration, there are no sudden awakenings, no periods of anxious wakefulness staring at the ceiling, no wrestling with the covers or adjusting of pillows in futile attempts to find a comfortable position. Instead, there is simply the deep, steady rhythm of natural sleep, the kind of rest that previous generations took for granted, but which has become so precious and elusive in this age of progress and innovation. As the hours pass and the night gradually gives way to the gentle approach of dawn, the sleep continues undisturbed. The gas lamps burn lower, but do not go out entirely, their steady flames providing just enough light to maintain the perfect balance between brightness and darkness that supports peaceful rest. Outside, the city begins its slow awakening milk. Wagons making their early rounds, factory workers beginning their journey to the mills. The gradual increase in activity that signals the start of a new day. But here, in this carefully prepared sanctuary, our Victorian sleeper rests on, oblivious to the awakening world outside, caught in the embrace of the sleep that has been so long sought and so carefully cultivated. When morning finally comes and consciousness gradually returns, it will be with the satisfaction of having achieved what had seemed impossibly a full night of peaceful, restorative rest that leaves both body and mind refreshed and ready to face whatever challenges the new day might bring. For now, though, there is only the gentle rhythm of sleeping breath, the soft play of lamplight on peaceful features, and the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing that sleep, that most elusive of human experiences in the Victorian age, has finally been captured and held, if only for these precious hours of darkness when the modern world falls quiet, and the ancient rhythms of rest and restoration can assert their timeless claim on human life. The Victorian quest for sleep, with all its strange remedies and elaborate contraptions, has achieved its ultimate goal not through any single device or treatment, but through the patient application of accumulated wisdom, both ancient and modern, in service of humanity's eternal need for the peace that comes with perfect rest.